The fall of Andalus, or Al-Andalus, represents one of the most significant events in both Spanish and Islamic history. Spanning nearly 8 centuries, the story of Al-Andalus is one of remarkable cultural, scientific, and artistic achievements, but also one of gradual decline as internal division, external pressure, and religious strife ultimately led to its demise. The decline of this Muslim-controlled region on the Iberian Peninsula marks not only the end of an era for the Islamic world in Europe, but also the culmination of centuries of conflict between Muslim and Christian forces, shifting the course of history for the entire continent. Al-Andalus, the Muslim-controlled territories in what is today Spain and Portugal, was established in 711 AD following the defeat of the Visigothic king Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete by the forces of the Umayyad general Tariq ibn Ziyad. It was initially part of the wider Islamic expansion, and its influence and power rapidly grew. Under the Umayyad caliphs, particularly during the reign of Abd al-Rahman I, Al-Andalus flourished. The region became a center of culture, science, and learning. Its cities, especially Córdoba, were the epicenter of intellectual and artistic life in Europe, a beacon of knowledge and enlightenment that was often in stark contrast to the more primitive conditions in much of medieval Christian Europe. The period of the Umayyad Caliphate in Al-Andalus saw a remarkable fusion of cultures. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities coexisted, albeit with various degrees of tension. The convivencia, or coexistence, allowed for a blending of traditions that led to remarkable advances in science, philosophy, architecture, and literature. This intellectual golden age, however, would not last forever. While the Caliphate of Córdoba was at its peak, a series of internal conflicts and external pressures began to take shape, setting the stage for the eventual fragmentation and collapse of Muslim rule in Iberia. The decline of Al-Andalus began in earnest with the breakdown of the Umayyad Caliphate in 1031. Following the death of the last strong caliph Hisham III, the unified Muslim state in the Iberian Peninsula fragmented into a patchwork of smaller, competing kingdoms known as the Taifa states. These small states, often plagued by internal strife and disunity, found it increasingly difficult to withstand the pressure from the Christian kingdoms to the north. The Taifa rulers, struggling to maintain their hold on power, often sought aid from outside forces, including the North African Almoravid and Almohad dynasties. While these dynasties initially offered military support and briefly revived the fortunes of Al-Andalus, they were often viewed as foreign interlopers by the local population, and their rule ultimately proved unsustainable. In the 12th century, the Almoravid and later, the Almohad empires brought a degree of order to the fractured state of Al-Andalus. The Almoravids, initially coming from Morocco, managed to hold back the Christian forces for a time, but their control over the region was tenuous. The Almohads, who succeeded them, were a more radical Islamic group that sought to impose a stricter interpretation of the religion, which alienated many of the local Muslim elites and populations. This created further instability and division within Andalusian society, and although these dynasties had military successes, they could not restore the region to the heights it once knew. The Christian Reconquista, the long process of reclaiming Iberia from Muslim rule, was an ongoing force during these centuries. The Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and Leon steadily expanded southward, eroding the Muslim territories. The fall of major cities, including Toledo in 1085, was a blow to Muslim power in Iberia. By the 13th century, the once unified Muslim kingdom was reduced to only the Emirate of Granada in the south. Granada's survival was, for a time, an anomaly. It managed to persist in part due to the political acumen of its rulers, who employed a strategy of diplomacy, paying tribute to Christian monarchs, and even playing one Christian kingdom against another. The Emirate of Granada became a tributary state of Castile, but it was a strategic partnership that allowed the Emirate to remain an independent Muslim entity in a sea of Christian rule. The Alhambra, the magnificent palace and fortress complex, was built during this period, symbolizing both the cultural richness of Granada and its precarious position in the face of a growing Christian presence in the region. However, by the late 15th century, the fate of Granada was sealed. The marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile in 1469 united the two most powerful Christian kingdoms in Spain, consolidating their control over most of Iberia. Their joint effort to complete the Reconquista culminated in the Siege of Granada in 1491. The final act in the fall of Al-Andalus took place in 1492, when the last Muslim king of Granada, Boabdil, surrendered the city to the Catholic monarchs. This marked the end of Muslim rule in Iberia, after nearly 800 years. The fall of Andalus had profound consequences. For the Muslim population of Granada, the end of the emirate meant a dramatic shift in their status. The Catholic monarchs offered a choice: conversion to Christianity, immigration, or death. Many Muslims chose to convert, becoming Moriscos, but their status remained tenuous, and they were often subjected to discrimination and suspicion. The legacy of Al-Andalus as a hub of scientific, philosophical, and cultural achievement, however, would live on in the minds of both Christians and Muslims, though in differing ways. In the years following the fall of Granada, the Catholic monarchs pursued a policy of religious uniformity, expelling Jews from Spain in 1492 and continuing the repression of Muslims. The Alhambra Decree, which ordered the expulsion of Jews, was part of this broader effort to consolidate Catholic control over the Iberian Peninsula. For the Jews and Muslims who remained, life in Spain would become increasingly difficult. The Inquisition, which had been established earlier in the century, intensified its efforts to root out heresy, and many Moriscos were forcibly converted or punished for allegedly practicing Islam in secret. The cultural and scientific achievements of Al-Andalus, once the envy of the known world, began to fade into history. The libraries of Córdoba, which had once held vast stores of knowledge, were no longer centers of learning. The intellectual legacy of Al-Andalus would influence the Renaissance, particularly in fields such as mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, but would no longer be a living, thriving culture in its own right. The fall of Al-Andalus marked not only the end of an era of Islamic rule in Iberia, but also the beginning of a new chapter in European history. The Christian reconquest of Spain and the expulsion of Muslims and Jews created a new, unified Christian Spain, which would soon emerge as a global power, with its overseas empire expanding across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The loss of Andalus, while it marked the end of a vibrant and diverse society, also paved the way for the creation of a Spain that was, by the standards of the time, ideologically and religiously homogeneous. In retrospect, the fall of Al-Andalus is a symbol of both the fragility and the resilience of empires. The region's golden age, marked by advances in science, culture, and philosophy, is often remembered as one of the most enlightened periods in European history. However, the fragmentation of its political structure, internal divisions, and the external pressures from the Christian kingdoms ultimately led to its downfall. The legacy of Andalus, while no longer a living political entity, continues to be felt in the cultural, intellectual, and artistic spheres. Today, the ruins of Al-Andalus, from the Alhambra to the Great Mosque of Córdoba, stand as a testament to what was once one of the most powerful and culturally vibrant regions of medieval Europe. The fall of Andalus was not just the fall of a state, it was the end of an entire way of life. It was the closing chapter of a period of coexistence and exchange between different cultures and faiths, the end of an age that saw the rise of intellectuals, poets, mathematicians, and scientists whose work would shape the future of Europe and the world. Though Al-Andalus itself was lost, its legacy endures in the minds of those who study its history and in the works of those who have sought to preserve and understand its cultural riches.